I'll say another welcome as people keep coming in. We have a large group of people coming in and they keep flowing in. So just give us another few seconds as we bring a few more people into the event. Well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. My name is Mark Alexander. I am the Arthur J. Kenya Dean and Professor of Law at Villanova University, Charles Widger School of Law. It is indeed an honor and a pleasure to welcome you here to this very special program, The Legacy of Nuremberg, 75 years later. I am welcoming you on behalf of the law school, on behalf of our David F. and Constance B. Gerard DiCarlo Center for Ethics, Integrity, and Compliance, and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and the newly formed Greater Philadelphia Law Professors Ethics Consortium, which includes representatives from all of the Philadelphia area law schools, Villanova, Temple, Drexel, and Penn. For those of you who have registered for CLE hours, this course is approved for 1 Pennsylvania ethics credit. You will need to submit the evaluation form by 5 p.m. tomorrow, Friday, October 30th, 2020, in order to receive credit. Unlike some other programs, the 2 attendance verification words, sometimes called the CLE words, those will be communicated only through the chat. So repeat, if you want the CLE, please watch the chat for the 2 CLE words, which are the attendance verification words. They will be in the Zoom chat. They will not be spoken by the panelists. So if you have questions, there will be contact information on the screen after the program. Now to turn to the program. We are deeply honored, truly honored to be able to host today's program along with the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. This is an incredible institution that teaches us about a time when the most cultured and educated society in the world found a way to commit the most atrocious human atrocities the world has ever seen. We'd like to think we have learned the lesson as a people, but alas, we still see that genocidal events continue in front of our eyes today. Syria, Burma, just to name 2. So as I look at it, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum is essential for all of us as human beings. For those of us who are attorneys and future attorneys, we should pay close attention to the process of law that allowed the Holocaust to unfold. It didn't happen in spite of law, but rather through it. And as attorneys, we are the ones who wield that tool. These are issues that are essential to a legal education. And I'm thrilled that Villanova Law and the Gerard DiCarlo Center and our area partners can help further this discussion. So we have an opportunity, a privilege, and responsibility to be guardians of the law. So we all need to remember that the need for this history and its lessons is especially acute in difficult times, which, as history has shown, provides fertile ground for those who are interested in promoting division, hate, xenophobia, and anti-Semitism. This is what the museum exists to counter through its educational work. And this is the point of our panel today. Now, speaking of the panel, it is an honor to have such a distinguished group of people involved, and I want to personally thank you all for taking your time to speak with us. And if I might, I have to single out Ben Ferenz, and thank you for showing us what it means to devote yourself to something bigger than yourself in order to make the world a better place. Ben Ferenz is a role model and indeed a hero for us all. So with that bit of introduction, I would like to turn this over to our moderator today to introduce our panelists. It is an honor to have the support of so many individuals, and I'm so pleased that we have Brad Wine, a partner at the law firm of Morrison & Forster, as our moderator today. He has been involved with the museum for many years as a member of the governing board, as well as on the Committee of Conscience. So Brad, I thank you for leading this conversation, and to all of you, once again, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Dean Alexander. And on behalf of the Holocaust Memorial Museum, I want to thank you for your participation, as well as your colleagues at Villanova. Also would like to thank specifically Professor Steve Chanenson for all of his tremendous support in making today possible, and also to Andre Sabriel from the museum, who's worked so hard to pull this all together. I had the great pleasure to serve on the museum's governing council along with Connie Gerard DiCarlo. And she and David are wonderful people and dear friends of the museum as well as Villanova. Until they moved a few years ago, they were an active part of the Philadelphia community, which has long and very significant history with the museum, literally from its conception. We're thrilled that so many people from this community are joining us as well, and I thank you so much for your partnership. On so many levels, the history of the Holocaust has become a vital reference point for the events unfolding today. And I'd say that as lawyers, we have countless lessons to learn about the ways that the legal system are used for better and sometimes for worse. 75 years ago, next month, the trials at Nuremberg commenced, setting what is perhaps the most iconic legacy in the law to come from that history. These trials have served as a guide for every subsequent effort to pursue justice in what has unfortunately been too many conflicts, too many genocides, and too many crimes against humanity. As a lawyer and a member of the museum's Committee on Conscience, which is the committee connected to the Simon-Skjodt Center for the Prevention of Genocide, I come to today's conversation with an enormous respect for this aspect of the museum's work and for the accomplishments of our panelists. Before I introduce them, I want to take just a couple of minutes to share some housekeeping notes. First, we welcome and in fact, we encourage your questions. For those of you viewing via webinar, please share your questions via the Q&A function at the bottom center of your screen. And for those of you watching via YouTube, please send us your questions via the live chat. As I'm sure you've all become aware in this COVID era, where we rely so much on technology, sometimes that technology breaks down on us a little bit. We're hopeful that that's not going to happen today, but if there is a glitch, please forgive any that may possibly occur. And finally, as Dean Alexander noted, we will provide you with CLE information throughout today's presentation. So with that, I'd like to welcome all of our panelists to today's program. First, let me introduce Naomi Kikoler. Naomi is the director of the Simon-Skjodt Center for the Prevention of Genocide, a human rights lawyer, and the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. Barry Avrich is an award-winning documentarian and director of the film Prosecting Evil. Hopefully everyone today had a chance to view the film before today's program. If you haven't, I strongly recommend it to you. It's available on Netflix. And last, but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Ben Ferenz, a former prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials following World War II, and throughout his life, a tireless advocate for a concept he simply refers to as law, not war. At a young 100 years old, he is truly a living legend. And on behalf of our audience today, I'd like to welcome our panelists. Thank you for being part of this program. We are so fortunate to have you with us, and I'm thrilled to let you know that there are more than 1,000 people joining us from around the world, 30 states, as well as viewers in Australia, Italy, Japan, Poland, Ghana, Argentina, Germany, Ireland, the United Kingdom, and Mexico, with a heavy emphasis on law students and young lawyers. As we indicated with the leadership of Villanova and the surrounding law schools, Philadelphia is particularly well represented. But dare I say that there are people watching today's program who very well could be the next lawyer, the next man or woman who makes the impact that Ben has made on the area of the law that we're here today to learn about. Ben, my first questions to you. Before you were a Nuremberg prosecutor, you were an actual witness to the crimes of the Holocaust. You joined the army, you landed at Normandy, you fought the Battle of the Bulge. You were tasked by General Patton with collecting evidence of Nazi atrocities, entering camps shortly after liberation by the United States and its allies. And you were eventually tasked with helping to set up the United States' first war crimes branch in Europe. You've described the job of collecting evidence in Nazi crimes as peering into hell. Can you describe for us briefly what you saw when you entered camps?
Before I launch you into the grim part of my story, I want to thank you, and I want to thank the dean and all the other friends in Philadelphia and Villanova for inviting me to come. It gives me an opportunity to serve as an example what you can do if you never give up. And I never gave up trying to get into the Army. They didn't want me. The Air Force said I was too short. I couldn't reach the pedals. I said, how about a navigator? They said, they tested me and they said, well, if we told you to bomb Berlin, you'd probably end up in Tokyo. So it took me a while to persuade the Army to recognize that I had various talents. I was already a graduate of the Harvard Law School, an honor graduate on a full scholarship. Came from very modest surroundings, born in a house in a country no longer exists, Transylvania. My sister born in the same bed was, she was a Hungarian. I'm born in the same bed, I was a Romanian. So it was a strange background. And to come to your question, to jump from that right into the scene of horror, concentration camp, it's, I hesitate to do that because I will give you the answer, but in order to appreciate it, you have to know something about where I came from and what my background was. And I had some idea from my work at Harvard, where I was hired by one of the professors, Sheldon Gluck, who was doing a book on war crimes, and I had been getting reports coming in from what was then called the International Law Commission, not to be mixed up with the UN group, refugee lawyers who had fled from Germany and who were established in London and were collecting evidence at that time of the crimes. And Sheldon Gluck was getting the evidence sent to him at Harvard, and so I had it. But I could never have imagined the reality of what I saw. First, my job was to get into the camps as soon as they were liberated, because if you stalled or delayed, there'd be such chaos that everything would be destroyed. I would get a report to General Patton's headquarters. First, we had to set up a war crimes branch. I was the first member of that branch. I was the whole branch. I would race to the scene of the crime. The report had said, we see people coming out, it looks like work camps, and they're all bedraggled, and it looks like they're dying. Do something. Well, I would get into my Jeep and race to the scene of the crime. There was a tank commander who was usually taking over the camp, American tank commander. And I'd go to the commander, I say, I'm here on orders of the President of the United States, carrying out a policy of the United States approved by General Patton. I want 10 men immediately to surround the Schreibstube, the office, before they got in there and everything was destroyed. But the scenes that you now are seeing on the screen was typical. Dead bodies lying all around. You couldn't tell if they were dead or alive. Their eyes sometimes open, pleading for help. The crematoria surrounded by piles of bones, which were human beings waiting to be burned. So they were human, they were alive, but they looked like a pile of bones. And the stench in the air of the bones and of the people being burned. The inmates trying to get up and pleading for help, and the SS trying to flee. Every disease in the camp, dysentery, diarrhea, scenes of inmates groveling. Sorry. These are very real. Groveling in the piles of garbage, looking for a bit of food. That was the scene in the camp. I wrote somewhere I had peered into hell. I don't think hell was any worse than that. And I have difficulty talking about it still today.
And so, Ben, the war ends, you've documented these atrocities, and you are given the opportunity to work on something that was unprecedented at the time, the trial of perpetrators at Nuremberg. How did what you saw, how did what you witnessed affect you in your role as a prosecutor?
Well, to give you just a direct answer, it has affected me so that I'm still suffering from it. I was traumatized by what I saw. And people ask me, what are you doing now? You've passed 101 years of age and you're still working from day to night. I can't help it. I can't stop because I have to do whatever I can to stop it. Now, I'm perfectly aware that since war has been glorified for centuries, that I'm not going to be able to stop it by saying war is madness. War is genocide. I was the first one to use that term in my opening statement in the Einsatzgruppen trial. So I have been struggling to have what seems to me common sense acceptable, and that is, if you have a dispute, settle it by law, by lawful means only, without the use of force. If you can do that, you will have saved millions of lives. And it's even worse today than it was in my day. Today we have cyberspace. From cyberspace, you can kill everybody on this planet in no time. And so to persuade them that law is better than war, no matter how you cut it. This is a job for lawyers primarily. We're the people who talk about law and pass the laws. And so that has been the overriding influence in what I have been doing with my life. And lest people say it's a fool's errand, maybe, but we are making progress, slow progress. We may come into a discussion later. Some people don't want law. This president does not want law. He wants the International Criminal Court destroyed. We may come to that, I hope, a little bit later, because it's my baby. And anybody who tries to kill my baby has got to reckon with me too.
Well, I don't think anyone in today's presentation or any of our participants would suggest this was anything close to a fool's errand. And we are going to talk about your work since Nuremberg in just a little, but I'd like to bring Naomi Kikoler into the conversation for just a moment. Naomi, the Simon-Skjodt Center for the Prevention of Genocide is the museum's division that meets the obligation of never again by confronting contemporary genocide and related crimes. Using research, eyewitness testimony, and risk monitoring, the center alerts leaders to conditions of genocide and the consequences of ignoring evidence. This evening, I'd like to ask you about the center's Ferenz Institute, International Justice Initiative. Could you tell us a little bit about the initiative and how it builds on Ben's life work?
Thanks so much, Brad. I mean, just as a starting point, it's an immense privilege for all of us at the center to be able to attempt to take forward Ben's work. I mean, we rest on the shoulders of true giants. Ben made the comment about trying to join the Air Force. And, you know, in our minds, Ben is, one of the largest living luminary in the international justice field. What we try to do is very similar to what Ben did 75 years ago. And it's profoundly humbling to know that internationally, the expectations, especially amongst survivor communities, has gone up exponentially around the pursuit of justice, and that there is a deep and ardent cry for justice and accountability from survivors. Unfortunately, the political will and commitment, usually of governments, to actually see that through has not matched that expanding rhetoric. So what we do is focus on, as Ben did, documenting, going to countries or neighboring countries if we can't enter a particular country, to collect evidence of the nature of crimes that took place. We went to northern Iraq as ISIS was still holding territory to document the commission of genocide by the self-proclaimed Islamic State. We've been documenting the crimes committed against the Rohingya, the Uyghur community, doing legal analysis to actually attach a name, because so many political actors are reluctant to even call the crimes today by their actual names. We take that work forward by then trying to continue Ben's work to build and strengthen legal norms and the institutions that can hold perpetrators accountable, be that the ICC, be that forums in countries. Many of the Syrian cases right now that we are supporting are being heard in European courts, working to help advise institutions like the International Court of Justice that's looking at the question of the genocide committed against the Rohingya. Ben mentioned the fact that he was the first to use the term genocide in the Nuremberg cases. One of the tragic deficits of the Genocide Convention, for all of the lawyers and law students that are listening, is that the obligation to prevent in the convention is not defined. So we've launched a major initiative under the Ferenz initiative to try to help governments and civil society understand what that prevention obligation looks like, to help strengthen the legal arguments for how you can actually prevent and then also hold perpetrators accountable. And a large part of the work, as Ben said, focuses on this question of law, not war. How do we prevent these crimes from happening in the first place? By the time you are collecting evidence, we have failed collectively to uphold our obligation to never again. So finally, the last area that we focus quite a lot on in advancing Ben's legacy is in mobilizing the political will to act, informing and engaging the American public, using the physical space in the museum to talk about the atrocities that are being committed. We've launched an exhibit right now on the Rohingya genocide. We just had an exhibit for 5 years on Syria. We use that space to bring members of Congress, to bring US government officials, UN Security Council ambassadors. And thanks in large part to the work that was done around Syria, we were able to see legislation advanced within Congress that saw hundreds of millions of dollars earmarked specifically for justice and accountability for Syrian and Iraqi survivors of crimes against humanity and genocide. So we try to create an echo chamber at many different levels. But I end with the starting point, which is 75 years after Nuremberg. We still have a long way to go to actually realize the full commitment to ensuring that never again has meaning and that perpetrators of genocide are actually held accountable.
Thanks, Naomi. Barry, I'd like to bring you into the conversation as well. First of all, thank you for what is just such a wonderfully done film, a tremendously compelling story in the life of Ben Ferenz. I understand you learned of Ben's story from your daughter who was watching it on 60 Minutes. Can you tell us a little bit about what compelled you to make this film and why it was important for you to make it?
Thank you, Brad. Well, first of all, I don't want to drive Dean Alexander crazy, but I think these law students should get 2 credits for this, but he won't agree. And secondly, I want to thank Ben's son, Don Ferenz, who's in a lot of ways carrying on a lot of Ben's great work and was helpful in ensuring that, you know, this film get made and the connective tissue happen to make this happen. Ben is besieged with requests, and in fact, right now we're working on a motion picture feature film about Ben's life, which as an extension from the documentary, which we're excited about. But yes, it was my daughter who was watching 60 Minutes. I had not heard of Ben Ferenz, which is a huge problem. I'm not the child of Holocaust survivors, and Holocaust education is not mandatory in most schools, and that was a huge issue. And I had learned about the Holocaust through first watching Shoah, the miniseries, and then Schindler's List, and visiting the camps myself later on. And so when my daughter pointed out Ben Ferenz on 60 Minutes, I was blown away and said, you know, why isn't he on Mount Rushmore? Where is the Nobel Peace Prize? And I literally reached out to Ben Ferenz, got his number, phoned him up and said, you don't know who I am, but I have to make a film about your life. And he said, so let's do it. You know, and you know, a month later, the trucks were pulling up and we were making a film. I don't think he thought it would be a, you know, I think he thought it would be a 10-minute segment. We ended up spending a day, if not longer, making this film. Why Ben is compelling? I mean, he is, and he's heard this over and over. I mean, he is a hero in continuing this message and the sustenance of the message. We're living in a world right now where there are frightening power vacuums in places like Iran and Turkey, where these things, and Syria, where these things can happen again. So, you know, the lesson that the world thought they'd never have to go through and learn again when Ben stood there and was such a brilliant prosecutor just keeps coming up. So, and the other thing that I loved about Ben Ferenz is his optimism. It's so easy for us in this world, especially now, to sort of be grim and dark. And Ben is optimistic. This too shall pass, but he keeps sort of moving forward. And then finally, Brad, I just have to let you know, when I was rushing to make this film, as Ben kept reminding me, you know, Barry, I'm about to be in my 100th year. And now I'm sure he tells people that he's in his 101st year. I know him like a book already on that end, but he's smiling. I wanted to make this film and I wanted him to see it. And so, you know, I rushed down to Florida at the time, got a movie theater, got him in alone in that movie theater. We sat together. I watched the movie with him, waiting for, you know, Martin Scorsese's comments being Ben, you know, and he just sort of squeezed my hand and said, you know, this is all I really need. And I was so emotionally overcome by that. And of course, 2 seconds later, he goes, why didn't you include this scene? You might want to do a dissolve in the second part of that scene. And then became the legacy, which is now a great friendship.
What a wonderful story. And again, thank you for bringing it to the screen. For those of you who watched the film before the program, you saw that Ben really became an accidental prosecutor. At the ripe age of 27 years old, he had no prior courtroom experience, and yet he was thrust into the spotlight of really the attention of the world on Nuremberg and what was happening. I think we have, Ben, a picture of your court-issued ID from the International Military Tribunal, and there you are in the upper right-hand corner, a handsome young man. You specifically asked to pursue the cases against the 22 Einsatzgruppen defendants. Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened and why you felt it was important to prosecute these men for their crimes?
Complicated question in a way. While I was in the Army as a corporal, going into the concentration camps to get hot evidence of the crimes for a new war crimes program, which no one ever heard of. The Army themselves didn't know what a war crimes program was. War crimes meant conduct unbecoming a gentleman or AWOL. And one day I was tapped on the shoulder, a member of the corporal in the 115th AAA Gun Battalion, being trained for the invasion of France. I knew nothing about 105mm guns, but I knew from my studies at Harvard what war crimes were about. And a book which had been written by a Romanian by the name of Pella, who wrote a book in 1922 saying that we have to have an international court to deal with international crimes. The international crimes then were counterfeiting British pounds. Anyway, my army experience led me into the camps, and one day I was told when the war was over, I was looking for a job. I got a telegram from the Pentagon, say, "We'd like to talk to you, dear sir." They never called me sir. 3 years of combat and every major battle. They got me 5 battle stars when I was getting killed. And I went to the Pentagon and I met there with a Jewish colonel, Bernstein. No, that's another one. But who knew the army was preparing their own subsequent trials. And I said, "Do I have to go back in the army?" He said, I said, "If I do, I'm not going. You have to be declaring war on Germany and be losing before you get me back in the U.S. uniform." So he said, no, you can go as a colonel, simulated rank. I said, "How long do I have to give you notice that I don't want it?" He said, "You can quit anytime you want." This began to get interesting. But he said that somebody else wants to talk to you. The Army had decided, it was not the Army, but the United States government had decided, in addition to the International Military Tribunal, which was headed by Justice Robert Jackson, then was the IMT trial, which was already on and nearly finished when I got out of the Army. The United States planned to have a dozen subsequent trials, which would explain to the public how it was that a civilized country like Germany could allow such things to happen. And so they thought the doctors who perform medical experiments should be tried also. Experiments on concentration camp inmates. That was the next case number 1. They, against the justice ministers who perverted the law, against the industrialists who worked people to death, against all the other areas of society which exploited and murdered inmates. And Taylor, who was then a colonel in the Army, had served during the war as well, said, "Look, you know all about what happened. We want you to go back." And I went through the same drill with him. I said, "Oh, how soon can I quit?" He said, "Anytime." And I said, "All right, I'll see." I called up my girlfriend, who had been waiting patiently for about 10 years while I went through law school and through the Army years and so on. I called her up and I said, "How would you like to go to Europe for a brief honeymoon?" She said, "I love it." I said, "You got it." I'm sorry to announce our picture is here on my desk. She died about a year ago after 74 years. I'm very happy. We never had an argument. Anyway, to come back to your question.
Ben, let me break it down for a second. I don't want to assume that our attendees know who the Einsatzgruppen were. Can you tell us who this group was?
I will tell you how I got there. Taylor's first assignment to me was, look, we got 12 trials set up. We have the suspects here, but the suspects with no evidence is useless. And so we had all the top leaders of the Nazi hierarchy. We already had them in jail in Nuremberg, most of them. And he said, "We have to get the evidence. You know how to collect the evidence. You know what it means. You go to Berlin, set up an office where all these files were kept for these Nazi agencies, and feed back the material to the lawyers who had already been hired to do these different dozen trials." And I said, okay. I set up an office in Berlin with a staff of about 50 people, spread them out, former German refugees, many of them Jewish refugees, not necessarily all of them. And I assigned them. You do the industrialists, you do the doctors, you do the lawyers. One day, one of my researchers comes in and he says, "Look what I got." And a big pack of things. It looked like a loose leaf folder. And it was Ereignismeldungen aus der UdSSR, situation reports from the Eastern Front. And these were reports by special groups called Einsatzgruppen. Einsatzgruppen was a name given to disguise what they had to do. Einsatzgruppen is groups. And the assignment of the Einsatzgruppen was very simple. Kill every single Jewish man, woman, and child you can catch, wherever they are. Kill them all. That was it. No pity, no remorse. Kill them all. Wipe them out. Exterminate them. And to do that, they had about 3,000 people assigned to the different Einsatzgruppen, A, B, C, and D. I had the list, I had the documents, and I had their daily reports. The daily report said Einsatzgruppen A, segment B, entered the town of Babi Yar in Kiev, and in the first 24 hours, we succeeded in liquidating 33,271 Jews on 29-30 September 1941, and signed on the bottom by the commanding officer. So I got this. I took a little adding machine, and a hand adding machine, and I began to add them up. When I reached 1 million, I stopped. I took a sample. I got the next plane going from Berlin to Nuremberg, where the trials were already starting, the subsequent trials. I met with then promoted to General Telford Taylor, and I said, we have to put on a new trial. I said, I have here in my hands mass murder on unprecedented scale. He said, we can't, because the Pentagon has approved above it. We have 12 subsequent trials, and they're not inclined to increase the budget. They're not very keen on these trials anyway. And so there's no way that we're going to put on a new trial at this stage. The lawyers have all been assigned. I got my anger up. I said, you're not going to let these bastards go. And he said, well, can you do it in addition to your other activities? I said, sure. He said, okay, you do it. So I became the chief prosecutor. We had 3 or 4 assistants who weren't worth much. But, and it turned out to be the biggest murder trial in human history. But to come to your question, how do you decide what to do and what to ask for? I gave this some serious thought because I was a serious criminal law specialist in Harvard Law School as well. I said, then how can you do justice in this case? How can you balance the scales of justice? 1 million innocent people murdered against, they limited the number of defendants I could have to 22, because that was the amount the international military tribunal had. So it's quite ridiculous, of course, to say you can only try 22, and you got 3,000 mass murderers in your hands. And I said, well, how do you do justice in a case like this? And I concluded that it didn't really matter what happened to these 22 people. That would be symbolic, even if you chopped them up into 1 million pieces and fed them to the dogs. And that went through my mind, but not serious, really. But I thought, if I can get a principle of law established, that all human beings are entitled to live in peace and human dignity, regardless of their race or creed or color, because mostly the Jews were murdered, the Gypsies as well, other people, crippled people, that they did as well. So if you could get a rule of law enforceable in a court of law to protect people in their right to have difference of opinion or difference of color of skin, that would be a contribution. And so I asked the court, it is with sorrow and with hope, I said in the open meeting, sorrow for the victims, hope for the future, that we here disclose the murder of over 1 million innocent and defenseless men, women, and children. Vengeance is not our goal, nor do we seek merely a just retribution. The case we present is a plea of humanity to law. And I explained that if we could get a rule of law which would protect all of humankind from this sort of slaughter, that would be an important contribution. And that's what I put into my closing statements as well. I rested my case in 2 days. because I didn't need any witnesses. I could have had 100, I could have had 1,000 witnesses. But witness testimony, I knew from law school, is very fallible, and I don't need it. I have the best evidence possible, a contemporaneous document, top secret, from the subordinate to his superiors, telling me exactly who did the crime against who and when and why. I said, I don't need anything else. I'm going to hang them on their own documents. And I didn't call any witness except one person who assembled these things in Berlin and distributed them in 99 copies to different branches of the Nazi hierarchy, who said, we never heard about this, you know. So I thought to establish a rule of law as being the important thing. And in the conclusion, if I may jump to the end of that, I said the defendants in the dock are the cruel executioners whose murders created the, I've forgotten the wording now, the greatest crime in human history. Death was their tool and life was their toy. If these men be immune, then law has lost its meaning and man must live in fear. The prosecution rests. I convicted all of them and 13 were sent to death.
And we're gonna show the audience a clip from your opening statement in just a minute. But before we do that, I have a question from you from the audience from Brianna in Italy, and she asks, what were some of the fears and the worries that were going on in your mind as you headed to trial? Were you concerned at all? Were there things that were making you anxious at the time?
No. People say, well, weren't you nervous? No, I wasn't nervous at all. I had the evidence. I knew how powerful that evidence was. I knew that you couldn't refute it because I had it all in official stamps, top secret. And my attitude was, come on, you bastards. I've got you now. And that was it. They were the ones who were frightened, not me. I didn't murder anybody, but they did. And they knew it. And I had the proof and they knew that too.
So we have a clip of your opening statement. I want to share that for the audience, and then I've got a question for you. Let's go ahead and play the clip.
This was the tragic fulfillment of a program of intolerance and arrogance. Vengeance is not our goal, nor do we seek merely a just retribution. We ask this court to affirm by international penal action man's right to live in peace and dignity, regardless of his race or creed. The case we present is a plea of humanity to law.
Ben, it's such a wonderfully composed opening statement, and you chose your words with precision, and you were very careful in your opening argument, specifically the sentence, and you memorized it to this day, 75 years later, you still remember it so well. Vengeance is not our goal. The case we present is a plea of humanity to law. Why did you believe then? And I presume, I know that you believe now that law was the answer to such horrible crimes.
I also was the first to use the word genocide. I knew Raphael Lemkin from the days of Nuremberg. He came to Nuremberg when the trials were on, and he was somehow hooked in with the Polish government, and I found accommodations for him. I got to be a friend of his. He gave me his book, Axis Rule in Occupied Territory. And I knew how he had tried to get the world to recognize that genocide was a crime. And so I used the term genocide in the second paragraph of it, because I felt that all wars are genocide. All wars. War is genocide. And I was confident that what I was asking the court to do, to condemn what is normally hailed as a great victory, or great, war is glorified and has always been glorified for centuries. How do you turn that around? I had no illusion that I could do it by myself, but I had no illusion that I was right. law is always better than war. And I hope the young lawyers will recognize that. So if they want to do something for humankind, it's to do whatever they can to prevent war. And if they can do that, that would be a great contribution, would protect all people. And that's what I tried to do. And I made that argument to 3 judges, led by Judge Michael Musmano of Pittsburgh, who was a devout Catholic, and who recognized it. This picture, actually, just put on the screen, was heralded in the press that 2 defense lawyers are jumping up to object to a document being introduced by Ferenz, who was sitting in the middle. I was not sitting, I was standing. So there you have it. I got up, the 2 guys on each side would say, object to that, object to that. I said, and tell me what your objections are. I have the originals in my office. Go up and look at them. If you still think it's a forgery, something, come down and the court will deal with it. Every document I presented here is the original German official Geheimbereichsache secret secret report, and I had a pile of them, and so they didn't succeed. But,
Barry, go ahead.
I just want to ask Ben a question, and I, it also what makes him so compelling for me as a filmmaker is the fact that whatever affected him yesterday is today. I mean, it's still so with him, and that opening statement should be carved into stone and memorialized, because whatever he said 75 years ago in that opening statement is relevant today. Ben, as I look at that photograph again of you surrounded by those giants, and this question is really inspired by my friend Juliana Greenspan, who's watching, as a criminal attorney. Did you feel any disrespect by these the defense lawyers or the other team around you, not the allies, but by the Germans in that court? Did they treat you disrespectfully, I wonder?
No, they never did. They were lucky to have the job, because as lawyers who were paid by the Allies, German lawyers, they could buy cigarettes, they could buy other things. They were happy to have the job. And I did not fraternize with any judges or with any lawyers or with any defendants. I played hard cold. I'll talk to the defendants in the courtroom, not before. I will not talk to the judges. I don't want to be accused of fixing the case in anything. So it was not disrespectful. They were correct in all respects, even in their argumentation. I mean, most of them say it was superior orders, what you expect, and so on. But there was a cool relationship. We were not buddies with the defense counsel, but I would not say they were disrespectful either.
And were you, Brad? I'm sorry, one more, Brad, if I may, forgive me. Ben, there's a scene in the film where you talk about going to see Otto Ollendorf in his cell. And this is essentially a mass murderer, an exterminator. What inspired you to go down and see him, and beyond curiosity? And were you nervous?
The answer was not curiosity, and it was not nervous. Ollendorf, according to his reports, murdered 90,000 Jews. He was a brigadier general in the SS, Dr. Otto Ollendorf. He was my lead defendant, selected by me as the #1 guy. When asked at the trial, is it true that you killed 90,000 Jews? He said, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? That's your report. Well, he said, but the men like to brag about the body count. And so that's what the information they gave me, but I think they tended to exaggerate. In other words, they were prouder of what they did. The argument we were forced to because of superior orders, that was a lot of baloney. I said, will you say 60,000, 70,000? Yes, that would be more like it. So he confessed, The next thing he said he would even put his sister to death if it was necessary in the public interest. That was a question put by the judge. And his alibi was, or his excuse was, that Hitler knew that the Russians planned to attack them. And therefore, it was justifiable for him as a patriotic German to try to preempt that by attacking first. And that was, and he said that was legal. That's why I did it. And I would do it again.
Naomi, I'd like to bring you into the conversation, especially because we got a question from one of our audience members in Philadelphia. Just as a preface, the Ferenz International Initiative describes its approach to as placing victims and survivors at the center of its work. And so our audience asks, why is that? And what does it look like in practice? Describe a little bit about the work you're doing these days.
Well, I can't do that until I add a point that I was reminded of the Ohlendorf case by the President of the United States, Donald Trump. In his first appearance before the United Nations General Assembly, he said, speaking to the head of North Korea, if you threaten us or our allies, we will certainly wipe you out.
I hope that's not the president.
Hello? I'm sorry, I'm on the phone. You have to call back in half an hour. Okay. Now, the president said, the president of the United States gave the Ohlendorf excuse. He said, if you do that, we will totally destroy you. I said to myself, I'm sitting by myself in my hideaway in Florida. I said, you're going to kill everybody? You line them up and shoot them? How do you totally destroy a country? And what kind of a pretense? It didn't save Ohlendorf, and he's making the same defense. I felt miserable, because I sent this guy to hang at the gallows. They had invited me to come to the hanging. I declined. Father of 5 children, patriotic man. And I felt a little sorry for him, is the truth. And here was the President of the United States saying he would do the same thing.
Naomi, Ben, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Naomi, could you just tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing today based on Ben's work and how that looks in practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what we often forget, and I recall, as I was going through law school, you read so many appeals cases and you at times almost tend to forget that what you're reading about is real people's lived lives. And what Ben is talking about with the 1 million people whose experiences he was seeking justice for, each person had a story. Each person had the potential to help change the world that was cut short. And the work that we do tries to help ensure that individual survivors and representatives of their community can actually have a seat at the table to advance their own justice. This young woman is Sian. She is a Yazidi woman who is studying to become a lawyer. She was separated from her family when ISIS attacked. She was almost killed, didn't know where her family was for weeks, and was sharing with me her experience as she was displaced because ISIS was still just about a few miles away from there. And one of the tragedies is the Yazidi community now, who were attacked in 2014, still remains displaced. When you talk to them and ask what is the number one thing that they would like to see, what they would like to see is individual perpetrators, ISIS fighters, commanders, leaders held responsible for the crimes that occurred. One of the challenges that they have is that there really is no forum right now for that to take place. What we have is investigations taking place in Iraq. So what we've been doing is working with local organizations, with communities, to try to help, one, educate them on everything from what are their rights when someone like I come in to speak to them, or in Ben's case, a prosecutor comes to interview them. What is the process for advancing justice? we know and we see today cases still of Holocaust survivors who are giving testimony, of perpetrators who are being held accountable 75 years later. These communities will wait however long they have to ensure that justice is served. Our hope is that we are able to help advise and inform the communities so that they themselves can be an active participant in pursuing and advancing their own justice and accountability, and that we have got the actual forums, institutions, courts, and the political will from the international community to see that through. It's a long process. It is an incredibly frustrating one for many, but I am constantly humbled by the tenacity of the lawyers that we have the privilege to work with, like Ben, who will simply never give up, but even more so by the resilience of the survivors who want to see justice for their own communities. And we work alongside them, and our commitment is to continue to do so for as long as we can, to make sure that we are doing all that we can to not just see justice served in these cases, but also to deter future genocides and other mass atrocities.
Thanks, Naomi. Ben, I've got a question for you from Joe in Philadelphia. Joe writes, the Nazis destroyed so much of the evidence associated with their crimes during the Holocaust. Why do you think they didn't destroy the evidence of the Einsatzgruppen atrocities?
Einsatzgruppen. They did destroy most of the evidence, but they didn't destroy all of it. And I found the ones they didn't destroy.
And so a follow-up to that from Arthur in Florida is, after the 22 defendants were found guilty, what happened to the evidence that you used? What happened to your papers? What happened to the work that you did with the court?
I gave everything I had to the Holocaust Museum in Washington. And I was very pleased recently to get a book here. If I get it on the screen here. I don't know. Oh, I got to point the camera. Is it on it? Anyway.
Got it.
Got him. Great for Russia, Restitution, Prevention. It was written, it's about 750 pages long, mostly in German, introduction in English. They went to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and they got my archives. All the negotiations I carried on for years with different German agencies and others to get the different things that this book deals with. And it's war crimes, restitution, which was a whole separate category here. And then the biggest thing is prevention from happening again. So they focused on that, 4 professors, and they worked on it for 9 years, 9 years. And it's a great book. I'm not pushing the book. I don't get any royalties anyway. But the evidence is overwhelming, and everybody who wants to bother, look, it's not deniable. The defendants themselves, they cooked up stories. I wasn't there. I was at my grandmother's funeral. I checked out his record. He never had a grandmother. You know, I had a good crew checking every word. And it didn't take very long to convict them all. And I hanged them on their own paper.
So your papers from 75 years ago are still the source of research and scholarship today.
They still are.
That's fantastic.
I get regularly questions. You know about my grandmother? She was living in town such and such and such and such, and what happened to her, and so on. Sometimes we can answer. Sometimes they didn't give you the name of the people. Sometimes the community. In a Fulda, for example, which was a Catholic town, they murdered all the Jews. The new residents of Fulda, I was the heir to all the cemeteries as well, because I was the head of the Jewish Restitution Successor Organization, and letting the state be the successor in case of death, somebody heirless. They appointed a Jewish organization. That I was the director, the first employee on that. But we came to who pays for the cost of maintaining the cemeteries in perpetuity, and as required by the Jewish tradition. And there was another case where I got angry. The chairman was Social Democrat. He had about 5 people of different departments. We were meeting in Germany, and I had one of my deputies with me, Dr. Katzenstein, and one of the other German representatives of the social ministry. He said, "Mr. Ferenz, you can ask us to do more for the Jews than we do for our own citizens." And I blew my cool at that. I had taken with me some bones that I had picked up in Auschwitz when I was there as a guest of the Polish Red Cross after the war. And I carried it around with me because I wanted a reminder what the hell I was doing. So when he said, "You can't expect us to do more for the Jews than we do for our own people," I blew my cool. I took the bones out. I pounded them on the table. And I said, "Who do you want to pay? You want them to pay? You murdered them. That's why they're asking you to pay. You ask them if you don't want to pay it." And the chairman was very wise. He said, "Recess." I called a recess for 20 minutes. And we all got up and went out, and I cooled down. And he came back, and the chairman said, "Mr. Ferenz, we accept your terms." So that was none
Well
of
done. A job well done. I know we're at the top of the hour. If I can beg the indulgence of our panelists in the audience, I just have a couple more questions and then we'll wrap it up. I'm sure that like all of you, I could sit here for quite some time with Ben and learn from him. But Barry, you've spent so much time with Ben. What have you learned from him that might benefit the rest of us?
From who?
I mean, there is, what have I learned from Ben? Definitely to eat simple foods. This is a man, I have to tell you quickly that, when I arrived to shoot the film, and again, I know he thought it was going to be some 20 minutes, a 2020 segment, and we had, 8 cameras and all the complications of shooting. And he said, "What's with all the equipment?" I said, "Ben, we're shooting a feature about your life. I'm going to be here for 2 days." And he said, No, we'll do it. And we'll do it in a day. I said, "No, it's impossible." And, Ben is relentless. And we filmed for, I think, close to 8 hours and maybe a break for lunch so I could feed my crew. And at what point, and he had, I think, a poppy seed in the navel of an orange, nothing. The man eats nothing. And then as we were packing up, I said, "Wait a minute, Ben swims 100 laps a day." And I said, "Ben, I didn't shoot you swimming. I got to come back tomorrow. I want to, show the audience that you swim, that you're relentless." And he goes, "No, let's do it now." And off we went to film Ben Ferenz swimming laps. And even when we had enough, he'd go, "I'll give you a couple more laps." I mean, so what do I learn from Ben? I mean, optimism. There's no question. Being relentless. And at the same time, what a message to anybody getting older to stay curious, to keep reading, to stay involved. That's the message, to just stay vibrant as Ben is. I mean, listen, and again, in his 101st year, remembers everything. You got to be lucky, but remembers everything, cares, and passionate. This is a man who lives and gives back, and God bless him.
So Ben, as we wrap tonight's program, wanted to ask you this. You've been told no a lot in your 100 years, in your 101st year, as far as things that you wanted to do and talking to authority, from the first attempts to enlist to your initial plea to get a prosecutor assigned to the Einsatzgruppen case. But the answer no hasn't really stopped you in your life when you believed in something. Speaking to the young lawyers that are watching tonight, what advice would you give them?
Very simple. I give you 3 pieces of advice. 1, never give up. 2, never give up. 3, never give up. Because and I know that law is better than war. That war will murder a lot of innocent people, no matter what you do. And if you know that, it keeps me going for law. I very much regret the fact that the president now, President Trump, is determined to kill the new International Criminal Court that we have in The Hague by imposing conditions on them. If they dare to investigate any American, hooray for we Americans. If you dare to investigate them, we'll cut off your passports, we'll block your currency, we'll make it impossible for you to do your job. That is the President of the United States, the new candidate. It's a shame. I think it's a shame. All lawyers should rise up and say, look, you can't do that. We give them a fair trial. You don't take vengeance. Vengeance is not our role, I said, because I'd seen the horrors of vengeance, and they are horrible. When the inmates caught one of the guards and cooked him, they put him in a crematorium. First, they beat him up a bit, and then they put him in a crematorium to warm him up, took him out, beat him up again, put in again, and they let him burn. That was a sample of vengeance. And it has also impressed me that vengeance is not our goal. We seek a more humane world. Let people behave like human beings. And
Ben, I was told that you had an instruction that on your tombstone you wanted inscribed, "I tried."
That's right.
And I just want to say on behalf of all of our attendees that we applaud you for everything that you've done in your life, everything you continue to do to this day. And we wish you 100 more years of health and happiness and life and good works for all that you do. We've come to an end. So I just wanted to thank all of our panelists.
I want to let you end before I express my appreciation to the Holocaust Memorial Museum. There are my legatee, my residual legatee. I came into the world as a pauper. I lived most of my life as a pauper. I want to go out the way I came in. And the Holocaust Museum has become the principal beneficiary of everything I've earned. I never took a penny from any concentration camp survivor. So I'm glad to have a chance to thank the Holocaust Museum for being there, for their courage in difficult times. And that's the best we can do.
Ben, we owe you a debt of gratitude and for all that you've done and for your tremendous support of the museum, both financially, but also through allowing us to be the custodians of your records, of your legacy that will live in perpetuity and will be a source of academic research for many years to come. For all of our panelists, I want to thank you for the wonderful conversation and for the incredible work, Barry, Naomi, and Ben, that you continue to do. It's simply extraordinary and something that we can all inspire to do in our own lives. Also, thank you again to Dean Alexander and his colleagues at Villanova's Charles Widger School of Law and the team at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum for putting all of this together. It's wonderful that we could do this with you and the Philadelphia community virtually. And I know that if we were all together in an auditorium, we would stand and applaud right now. But instead, we'll offer thanks virtually to all of you who have joined us. Thank you. Please remember, as of 3 days ago, the museum has reopened to the public. So you have an open invitation to return to visit us whenever you're next in Washington, D.C. And until then, I want to thank